Trust in politics is broken. So can we get UK politics working again?
That was the last time we were happy. 2012.
I'm Beth Rigby, Sky's political editor. Join me every week with Labour's Jess Phillips and Conservative peer Ruth Davidson for some electoral dysfunction.
This idea of nuance has completely left politics.
Yeah. Together, we'll focus on the policies that could deliver political satisfaction. Follow Electoral Dysfunction wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Neil Patterson. Welcome to the Sky News Daily. And in the aftermath of last week's local elections, there certainly remains an awful lot of politics around, including a defection, accusations of sectarianism, and university bosses being summoned to Downing Street. Sam Coates will be joining us just a little later. But I wanted to start with a genuine good news story. Let me introduce you to Opal Sandy.
Oh, good girl. Daddy kiss? Mummy kiss? Mwah.
Opal is a gorgeous little blue-eyed, red-haired 18-month-old, but she was unfortunately born completely deaf because of a genetic condition called auditory neuropathy. Here's the kicker, though. Thanks to a remarkable new therapy being trialled at Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge, she now has almost normal hearing. It is an extraordinary story, so let's speak to one of those involved, consultant paediatrician Dr. Richard Brown. Dr. Brown, if we can, let's start with the basics. Just for the layman, auditory neuropathy, what is that? What does it mean? How does it manifest itself?
So normally the inner ear contains a little structure, it's just shaped like a shell, and that is called the cochlea, and it is basically like the piano on which every single sound that you'll ever hear is played. And in this particular condition, the problem is that the cochlea can't speak to the nerve that takes the signal into the brain. So what is really important is that anatomically everything is perfect, so that all the structures are entirely there, and actually everything is functioning completely normally with that one exception. So it just means that the signal can't go from the hair cells that pick up sound and take it into the auditory nerve. And so that's what we're trying to correct with the gene therapy.
But the practical consequences of that for this poor wee thing were that she was technically deaf.
Absolutely. So from birth then she was profoundly deaf, and indeed her sister has the same condition, and her sister had cochlear implants on both sides. So at the moment, for these severe genetic auditory neuropathies, then the cochlear implant is the gold standard treatment.
But in Opal's case, we have a very good news story to tell, and it involves something which I think a phrase that I think people will have become rather more aware of over the past few years: gene therapy.
That's right. What we've been working on really for 25, 30 years is the ability to drop a working gene into the cells that need it. We use a modified virus. So we use something called an attenuated adenovirus, and that's able to drop small bits of genetic material into the cell, and then that corrects the spelling mistake in the genetic material for the rest of the child's life.
It sounds fascinating, it sounds remarkable, but ultimately, process is one thing, outcomes are another. And the outcome for this little girl is that she can hear again. It wasn't an immediate effect, though, we should say.
No, that's right. It took us about, I think that the family started to notice her response to sound after 4 to 6 weeks, but really, before we were able to see really good hearing on our testing, it was maybe 12 or 13 weeks. But by 24 weeks, then we've demonstrated that she has nearly normal hearing. So good that we're hoping that she'll never need hearing aids in that ear.
This is absolutely remarkable, and of course, early days. We don't know what will happen in a few years' time, but there is a huge amount of hope I'm detecting from you that this is a method by which children born deaf with this condition, forced to wear double cochlear implants, hearing aids in essence, that won't have to happen again.
I think that's right. I think for this condition, what we're hoping is that this might be an even better treatment. And I need to say, actually, that cochlear implants are fantastic.
Of course.
They've been a really important support to children with hearing impairment. But as you say, this is a one-and-done treatment. So what we're hoping is that this will represent a cure in that ear for Opal that will last for the rest of her life. And we're hoping as well that eventually we may be able to offer this treatment to children with the same genetic change, And then we can start thinking about even more hope. So what we're doing here is we're proving the concept that gene therapy delivered to that tiny little organ can be life-changing and safe, which of course is absolutely crucial.
And what effect has this treatment had on Opal, obviously first and foremost, but also on the family?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that they're absolutely delighted.
Yeah.
And I don't wish to speak for them, but I know that when she started using words such as daddy, then that had the emotional impact on them that you would expect. So it really is spectacular. It's really important that we were able to do this really early in Opal, because obviously speech and language development, cognitive development, all of those lovely things that we like to see in children, the sooner that we can get it in place, then the more normal we would expect brain development to be.
Doctor, you know what you're doing. When you mentioned, just hearing the word daddy for the first time from your little one, I think anyone who has a child just started to melt at that particular point. But of course, with breakthroughs like this, with treatments like this, it is all about making sure that it is safe, but then trying to scale it up to make sure that others can benefit from this. I mean, for the time being, this is still quite a small-scale trial, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. So there will be 18 patients in this trial, and we're recruiting in the UK, in Spain, and in the United States. And we expect to be able to publish those results, and as you can tell, we're really, really optimistic. And then after that, then what we hope is that we'll be able to demonstrate effectiveness, safety, and cost effectiveness. And then we hope that this treatment will be available to children with this condition in the UK.
Where is the United Kingdom when it comes to this sort of genomic therapy?
I like to think, actually, that we're at the cutting edge. So
Sounds like it.
It's really, really exciting. What we're hoping to do is to really produce genomic medicine that is meaningful not only in children with genetic hearing impairment, but also potentially in some other very serious conditions. So around, for example, neurological, metabolic, and hematological conditions. So I think we can look to the future and say that families who hitherto haven't been able to access a cure for their child, what we're really hoping to do is to prove that such treatments can be safe and effective.
Is there perhaps a cost element involved in all of this as well? Gene therapy, I'm wondering whether this is something that can be scaled up or whether the cost, at least for the time being, might be somewhat prohibitive.
We can look at the developing world and we can say, okay, so the cost may be an issue. But to have a one-and-done treatment whereby children with hearing impairment can benefit lifelong from one treatment without needing ongoing care, equipment, assessments, and other expensive and complicated interventions and therapies, then I think actually that there's a cost-effectiveness argument that needs to be made across the whole of the globe.
Point well put there. I have to ask, how was Opal as a patient?
Oh, it's an absolute delight. It's an absolute delight. But bearing in mind the fact that I'm afraid that I have had to do some blood tests on her, the fact that she still smiles when she sees me is always incredibly gratifying. She's been amazing. The family have been amazing. They had to take a chance here, didn't they? Because we said, okay, from everything that we can see, we think this will be safe and effective. But this is a research study. And so the fact that they had the bravery to let us try to help Opal in this way is great testament to their fantastic quality. So it's been wonderful working with them. We've had a really lovely patient one.
And from a personal perspective, you must be incredibly gratified as to what's going on. There must be awfully bad days, working as a paediatrician in a hospital. This must be a really, really, really good one for you and your team.
Well, this is the sort of thing that I would have dreamed of as a medical student. But I think actually, when you talk about, children and families going through really difficult things, this might be a good time for me to acknowledge some of the patients that I've cared for over the last 20 years who've had an incredibly stormy journey, sometimes with just really distressing events and sometimes some really sad outcomes. And those patients who have genetic disorders that we haven't been able to cure before now, I really think that one of the things we're doing here with this research is that we're trying to pave the way to a time when we'll be able to offer better treatments and indeed cures for those genetic disorders. So for me to think of my patients, and if they're listening, you know who you are. I think this is really exciting.
With your help, Dr. Brown, I suspect we might well get there. Dr. Richard Brown, congratulations. I wish you all the very best for the next stage of the trial. Thank you so much for joining us.
That's really kind. Thank you.
Stay where you are. After the break, we return to politics a week on from those local elections. Welcome back. A week ago, people were heading to the polls with local elections across England, plus a parliamentary by-election in Blackpool, all of which proved pretty horrific for the Tories. Rishi Sunak's pain at the ballot box was then compounded with pain at the dispatch box. Moments before the Prime Minister took to his feet at PMQs on Wednesday, Natalie Elphicke, Conservative MP for Dover, took her seat on the Labour benches, directly behind Keir Starmer, indicating that she had crossed the floor, as they say, and joined the Labour Party as one of its representatives. Now, all of this took the Tory benches by surprise. Also, a fair few on the Labour side, given Mrs Elphicke has been incredibly outspoken on immigration, describing the opposition plans as dangerous, and Labour as a party that backs fewer and weaker border controls. She also defended her ex-husband Charlie, the former MP for Dover, when he was convicted of 2 counts of sexual assault. She said at the time he was an easy target for false or vexatious allegations because he was attractive. Well, today the PM has attempted to get back on the front foot with a Whitehall meeting with university bosses over those pro-Palestinian protests taking place on campuses up and down the country. Sam Coates is our deputy political editor and he's back on the podcast. Sam, just explain what this meeting's all about.
I think that there is a practical policy point that Downing Street's trying to make, that it wants to impress on university vice-chancellors of the need to particularly look after Jewish students who might feel intimidated by some of these protests in university towns. You've got them pitching up on the lawn in Cambridge. You've got them at universities all over the country. And the university's response typically seems to be just behave yourselves, but we're not going to sort of stop this or block this. We recognise your right to protest. The point that Downing Street wants to impress on them is be aware of what this looks like if you're a Jewish student, to find people kind of very aggressively campaigning against the state of Israel. I think there is a strong feeling in Downing Street that making sure that Jewish students and others don't feel intimidated. But quite clearly, Neil, it's election year, there's politics here. And one of the lessons that the Conservative headquarters feels like it learned from the local elections is that Labour has an issue around Gaza. Yeah. Now, and the sort of politics of Gaza. And what's really, really fascinating is that they are, I think CCHQ is sort of almost trying to have it both ways with this issue. Because on the one hand, my interaction with them, the Tories very much want to highlight that in places like the West Midlands, there was a candidate, Ahmed Yaqub, who was a George Galloway candidate who got surprisingly high proportion of the votes, over 10% of the vote. The polls put him down at 3.
Could have stuffed Labour's chances there, couldn't they?
Absolutely. And that Labour are facing inroads into their support. I mean, that was true in Oldham. It was true in elsewhere. And that Labour are under threat. But at the same time, and you saw this on the front page of Thursday's Mail, they also want to say that Labour is leaning into this conflict, that in some way, far from hurting, they are trying to use what's going on in Gaza as a political opportunity.
This is the article by Richard Holden, the chairman of the party, accusing them of pandering to sectarianism to win elections.
He accused Labour of exploiting the Middle East conflict to win votes, days after we were talking about the conflict taking vote from the Labour Party. And I think what's happening there is CCHQ are going to sort of try and paint them all part of the same kind of team and group, and just associate Labour's opponents on the left with the Labour Party, and suggest that they're all one sort of contiguous force. There are all sorts of demands from organisations like the Muslim Vote of the Labour Party. And I think that Holden is trying to sort of suggest in some way that means that Labour Party and the Muslim Vote are in league. I think the Labour Party would fundamentally reject that and point to the fact that their position hasn't changed that far away from the government's position at any point through this. It is weaponising the conflict for political ends. I think that's going on. I think to a certain extent it is happening on all sides, but I think you're seeing it this week, particularly with the Tories.
As regards, the Muslim vote, I take your point. However, a Labour spokesman's gone on record saying, those 18 demands, look, we're not going to deal with them specifically, but these are all things that will form part of the conversation. That is something I'm sure the Tories will pick up on if they haven't already. But of course, the big political development, and tell me if you saw this one coming, Sam, the Conservative MP for Dover, Natalie Elphicke, crossing the floor and doing so at Prime Minister's questions.
No. Nobody saw this one coming. And although there have been rumours of defections, you would not put her top of the list.
Dear Lord.
You'd not put her in the list. You wouldn't put her on the bottom of the list. You just wouldn't have ever in a million years. Now, why is that? Because she is a Tory MP who many see as being on the right of the party. She backed Liz Truss in the second of this Parliament's leadership elections, winning that seat, Dover and Deal. She's the MP for small boats. Mm-hmm. And what's really good for Labour and really bad for the Tories is that the MP for small boats saying I trust Keir Starmer on small boats, not Rishi Sunak. She's making an argument that Boris Johnson's Conservative Party was the centre ground. Keir Starmer is the heir to that type of centre ground. Some may challenge that, but that was her argument. And that if you want to sort out housing, boats, migration, it is the Labour Party that's got more of a chance of doing that. It's important to say she was already standing down. She is standing down. She's not going to fight that seat. There's already a Labour candidate in that Dover seat. But I think it is a gutter punch, and Tories were surprised, dismayed, angry.
I'll tell you who was surprised, dismayed and angry as well, Sam. People sitting on the Labour benches.
I was talking to one former leader of the party who said, well, the Labour Party's a broad church, but there are always warts. And there is a bit of grumbling about that. And clearly some female MPs kind of went to the Chief Whip. The Chief Whip acknowledged the concerns. They didn't try to stop the defection in public. And this comes off the back of Rachel Reeves being rude on a podcast about Natalie Elphicke when she was still a Tory and all of that kind of thing. But, Neil, there is just a whiff of a Westminster bubble story about anonymous Labour MPs being a bit grumpy about the arrival of Natalie Elphicke. Political parties want to be big churches. They do. Political parties like swing voters. MPs are not often swing voters. You don't get many defections. But you do want voters to defect from one party to another. That's the whole point of our electoral system. And so, more or less, I think it's win-win-win for the Labour Party, and Keir Starmer watching some left-wing Labour MPs grumble over, the fact that his tent is so big, he's not going to be shedding any tears at that.
Doesn't Lord Cameron have a point when he said, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything? This defection says more about Keir Starmer and the Labour Party than it does the Prime Minister. Keir Starmer did not have to accept her into the Labour fold.
Hang on, that would be David Cameron. I'm just going to have to go back and read the biographies to remind myself of his extremely firm principles that guided him all the way through his premiership. I remember when he said it was nuts to have an EU referendum. I get a little lost in David Cameron sometime. Come on. What a load of rubbish. What a load of rubbish. If the boot was on the other foot, Neil, and it was a defection to the Tory party, do you think David Cameron would make any of these arguments? No, you just say these things as it's something to fill the airtime and, that's better than silence. But it's a load of rubbish. I do grant you that Natalie Elphicke's politics on paper or on Twitter for the last few years do not seem to mesh with the Labour Party. That is unarguable. So what's going on here? Well, I think it's no more complicated than Natalie Elphicke thinks that Rishi Sunak's a loser and that Keir Starmer's a winner. That's what's behind this. People in politics like to be associated with winners. Natalie Elphicke, disappearing from the political stage, wanted to make one more political splash. This is how she's chosen to do it. And yes, there's ideological kind of, complications with that. But the bottom line is, politics is in part emotional, and that's the judgment that she's made. And that's why it's so problematic for Rishi Sunak. It's a judgment by one of his MPs going, he's a winner and you're not. Sorry, boo sucks, I'm off.
Sam, thank you. Well, look, as mentioned there, several Labour MPs, including Jess Phillips, the former Shadow Minister for Domestic Violence, have raised concerns about Natalie Elphicke's comment about her ex-husband's victims, and indeed about her admission to the party. Ms Elphicke has released a statement in which she says this: "I have previously and do condemn his behaviour towards other women and towards me. It was right that he was prosecuted, and I'm sorry for the comments that I made about his victims." That's your lot for this edition of the Sky News Daily. We'll see you again soon.